It's not that Oklahoma State beat South Dakota State 44-20. It's that Oklahoma State dispatched the number one team in FCS that was riding a 29-game winning streak and snapped them in half. Okay, the Jackrabbits didn't know if they were coming or going at the end of this thing. Oklahoma State never trailed in this game and looked in control the whole time. I know this because I was watching it, so that's my job. I watch as much football as there is football to watch, and we talk about all the things that I think are interesting and or important for you to know here. That's where the analysis part comes from. But I'm looking at Alan Bowman's line here. It's 25-34, 267, 3 TDs. Never once looked rushed in this game. They were getting home against Mark Gronowski, who probably has a better draft rating than Alan Bowman at this time. Alan Bowman is in year 7. Mark Gronowski is not. And Mark Gronowski, national champion quarterback. Ollie Gordon had a ho-hum day by his standards, which is 27 rushes for 104 yards with 2 TDs, running through those dudes. And you could see the size disadvantage that the Jackrabbits were dealing with. And you could also see why Oklahoma State feels really good about their chances to make the college football playoff and win the Big 12 championship. 6 catches, 83 yards for Dejon Stribling. And then we had Rashad Owens, who had 3 catches for 81 there. Brendan Presley had the first TD catch of the game. Very cool because that's a Bixby dude. That's a hometown dude. But again, you're good in your kicking. I mean, Logan Ward was 3 of 3 with a long of 52. There's a lot to love about this if you're Oklahoma State. It's a quality opponent, even though I don't know that too many people are going to give you credit for beating up on an FCS team. It's a quality opponent, and it's a quality win by 24 points. This is what Colorado should have done to North Dakota State if you wanted people to talk about Colorado as being as good as most Colorado fans like to think that they are. You don't get into a nail-biter against the Bison. You don't do it. You go and you dispatch them. Why? That's the number 2 team in all of FCS, and you had them at home, just like South Dakota's the number 1 team in all of FCS, and Oklahoma State had them at home. You can see the difference was Oklahoma State never sweated this game. Not one time, not one moment. They didn't need a Herculean effort from Shedeur Sanders throwing for 445 yards against North Dakota State to go win. They didn't need a Herculean effort and over 100 snaps played from Travis Hunter to go win. They didn't need 198 yards receiving from Jimmy Horn to go win. They were sound defensively. They were sound offensively. They were balanced. They know who they are. They know what they got, and they're saying, come get it. That is really, really exciting if you're an Oklahoma State fan, and it ought to be really, really terrifying if you are in the Big 12 this year, because it feels like right now they are the class of the league, just given the opponents that we've seen them face, right? So, like, Utah is going to be good, but I don't really think Southern Utah is. We could talk about what Kansas did to Lindenwood. I mean, I don't know that we're really going to go there. There's some other teams that I think could give Oklahoma State a hard time, but the fact that you were able to put away a Jackrabbits team like this also bodes really well for anything that's going to happen in the rest of the schedule. And they got a big game against an Arkansas team that I think can push them, and I think can give them a hard time, knowing what Bobby Petrino might be able to cook up with Taylor Green, who had a tremendous first showing at Arkansas. The other thing that Oklahoma State made headlines for was, frankly, off the field, and it had everything to do with the QR codes that they were going to put on the back of the helmets of all the players, which I thought was really kind of cool and innovative. So the idea here was that Oklahoma State was going to put QR codes on the back of their helmets for their players so that the NIL collective could have a very easy way for people to go, I want to donate to this collective and raise some money to kind of pay for these players. And the NCAA came down with a decision that said, hey, that's in violation of the rules and the bylaws to place it, because they said the decals are advertising and or commercial marks, which are not permitted under NCAA rules, to which I would love to know what the NCAA thinks of the Nike swoosh or Adidas's 3 bars being on some uniforms, or Under Armour being on some uniforms. But, to Oklahoma State's credit, they said, look, we disagree with the interpretation of the rule, but we'll abide by it and work with the appropriate groups to lead on the need to change. This was Athletic Director Chad Weiberg. Our people came up with an innovative concept to raise NIL value of our student athletes, but ultimately it just serves as the latest examples of how college sports are evolving at a faster pace than the rule book. And that has been my stump for the entirety of basically for 4 years. Since we went back to going, we're going to have name, image, and likeness in the thing, or in the game. we need to act like it then. We need to go through that book and we need to update those bylaws so that they keep up with college football. We don't play college football so much as we play change. Our competition isn't so much on the gridiron as it is change. It is chaos. It is who can adapt quicker and faster. And Oklahoma State's doing that with things like this. And I applaud this move. Like, I really want to see these sorts of innovations and marketing advantages for players and athletic departments, because we're getting into a truly unparalleled, unrivaled, unseen arms race for players. Like, you're going to have to shell out. You're going to have to find money. You're going to have to go into the grandma's couch cushions just so you can not lose to Vanderbilt. By the way, Vanderbilt giving everybody the what, for, and the how now. I say everybody being in Virginia Tech, but you get my point here, right? If Florida doesn't pull off an upset of Miami, we're talking about Vanderbilt beating Virginia Tech, Georgia beating Clemson, Georgia Tech beating a number 10 Florida State. I mean, short of, my goodness, North Carolina beating Minnesota, what do we have to say here? Like, that's one way of looking at it. But I tend to go, all right, if we're going to try to pay for players, and we have to, like Ollie Gordon didn't go into the transfer portal because he's getting paid to stay at Oklahoma State, then you got to give us every opportunity to try to raise this money until such a time as the law or the bylaws change. And I think the bylaws could make greater effect, given that you're just going to get a quagmire and gridlock when you try to push this through Congress, because Congress don't want nothing to do with trying to change college football and take on any of that leadership role, to say nothing of how are you going to remain on the legal side of Title IX with all of this, because you can't just pay football players. You have to pay everybody. And there are different ways for which different universities are trying to tackle this. But at the front of it is always going to be the engine that is football. Like, I realize that there are some Title IX folks that, or people that cover Title IX sports, that are going, it's unfair that football gets the most of this money. And I'm going, maybe, but without football, it's really difficult to have revenue generating sports at all. And those are that say that, you know, athletics in college should not be about revenue generation. I'd like to point you to the formation of the NCAA was started, A, for people to stop cheating, and B, because football players were dying. Not anybody else, football players. Football players were dying on the field. And then when television decided to put football on television, we're revenue generating. That's just what we're doing. That's just what it is. You're not going to put that genie back in the bottle. So rather than argue against that, find a way to make sure you get what you are owed. If you are the head coach of the crew team, if you're the head coach of the women's volleyball team or the women's soccer team, or any other sport that has a hard time making money on its own. I always remember the way that Coach Gasso used to talk about Bob Stoops as softball coach and football coach. She would say, we get to do a lot of the things we get to do because football is good. And OU softball is the best in the world. Full stop. They are absolutely the pinnacle of their sport. And one of the reasons that they were able to do that is they got some tremendous leadership from President Boren and President Athletic Director Constiglione and Bob Stoops in that triumvirate. And it stayed that way with Joe Harris and Constiglione and Brent Venables. And you understand how each one of these things are hand in hand. And you've also got someone who said, look, how do we get in on this? How do we take advantage of this? And you get Love Field, which is a state-of-the-art softball facility. I'm looking around and I'm going, Oklahoma State wants to do this. Oklahoma State has decided it wants to play big boy football, and it has wanted to play big boy football basically since this dawn of the Mike Gundy era. It is a tremendously cool sentiment to know that the Pokes fans, even if we got our disagreements about a lot, they're pulling the same direction. They want a great football team. And that, for me, stands above all. And this is one example of that. Also, beating the hell out of South Dakota State when Colorado is struggling with North Dakota State is a great way to say, hey, Colorado, guess what you got coming in November? You got all of this. And there's a whole bunch of people that are looking forward to playing against Colorado. Colorado State getting its head handed to it by Texas. Nebraska handing UTEP its head. It's going to get thick, quick, fast, in a hurry in Boulder. But right now, Stillwater feels like the class of the Big 12. And in feeling like the class of the Big 12, I was really impressed by not just how few points they allowed, but how much yardage they were willing to give up without allowing much to happen. I mean, Mark Gronowski went 20 of 36 for 264, 2 TDs and a pick. They gave up 124 rush yards on 28 carries. And, I mean, goodness me, Griffin Wild went wild. 7 catches, 150 yards with a long of 60 and a TD, but 20 points. That's all they allowed. 20 points allowed. That's going to be good enough to get you a Big 12 championship this year and perhaps college football playoff berth.